Right, we're there. Now, thanks very much, Rob, and welcome everyone. Now, as you probably know, or maybe you don't know, it's No Smoking Day today. That gets almost no coverage in the national media these days, so I wouldn't be surprised if you're unaware of it. Nevertheless, if you do want to mark the occasion in the traditional manner, by which I mean lighting up, please feel free to do so. Now, this evening's webinar has been given the title Smoke-Free, A Better Britain, with a question mark. Now, I stress the question mark because one or two people seem to think that Forrest has gone over to the dark side and has actually joined the anti-smoking movement. Now, to be absolutely clear, we do not think a smoke-free England, Wales or Scotland would create a better Britain, far from it. First, it is unachievable by 2030. Now, that's the government's target for England. I mean, it's unachievable without the introduction of some seriously draconian policies designed to force people to give up. We're talking about further increases in taxation, which is already, as we know, at ridiculously high rates, more smoking bans, such as extending the ban to outside cafes and restaurants, then maybe pubs, not to mention parks, beaches, towns, and even city centres, some of which are already being considered by Wales. Now, other anti-smoking policies include raising the age of sale of tobacco to 21, reducing the prevalence of shops that can sell tobacco. We call this creeping prohibition because that's exactly what it is. Now, second, we believe it is wholly undesirable to aim to be smoke-free by a certain date. Forcing people to stop smoking to meet an artificial target would represent the end of choice. And that's what Forrest stands for, freedom of choice and personal responsibility. Now, I don't doubt that some smokers want to quit, and we have no problem with that if that's what they want to do. Freedom of choice is also why we are 100% behind reduced risk products, whether they are e-cigarettes, heated tobacco, or nicotine pouches. The more choice, the better, as far as we're concerned. But if adults choose to smoke, that choice must be respected by governments, the anti-smoking industry, and also the vaping industry. Now, in July, the government is expected to publish its new tobacco control plan, and that is why we're here tonight to discuss that and other tobacco control issues with our panel of speakers. Now, before I start introducing them, I should mention that we tried extremely hard to get an anti-smoking voice onto the panel tonight. We wrote to numerous anti-smoking MPs and peers, including those who have been agitating hard for a new tobacco control plan. The majority didn't reply, and the few that did declined to take part. And unfortunately, that's what we're up against. Our opponents won't engage in discussion because they refuse to acknowledge that there is more than one side to this debate. Our role, therefore, is to use meetings like this to make our case and to generate feedback that we can pass on to government and public health officials. Now, although we haven't got an anti-smoker on board or the panel tonight, we do have a range of opinion, including two speakers who have quit smoking and are now advocates of vaping and other alternative nicotine products. So we look forward to hearing what they have to say. We're going to go straight to our first speaker, Andrew Allison. Now, Andrew is head of campaigns for the Freedom Association. He was briefly head of office for Brexit Party MEP Brian Monteith, who used to be a spokesman for Forrest in Scotland. But Andrew returned to the Freedom Association after Brexit. He used to smoke, but he now vapes, and he ran the Freedom to Vape campaign, which was launched in 2016. Now, Andrew, I'll start by asking some questions we're going to ask every panelist at some point this evening, and then you can go on from there. First of all, is a smoke-free world achievable or even desirable at any time? Can smoke-free be achieved without coercion? And what role will e-cigarettes and other novel tobacco products play in reducing smoking rates to the government's desired level? Over to you.
I don't think it's achievable or desirable, Simon. People should have the freedom. I mean, with the Freedom Association, you're the freedom organisation for the right to enjoy smoking tobacco. It is all about freedom, and people should be given the freedom. And if they want to smoke, then they should. As to reducing the number of smokers that there are, well, coercion is the only way the government uses, pressurised by the sock puppets that there are in public health, who just increasing taxes. All right, we didn't get an increase in the last budget, but we had 2 last year anyway, so we didn't really need any more. And they will do that by some of these more draconian bans, such as is being proposed in Wales, where not only should you not be smoking outside a restaurant or a cafe or a bar, but they're trying to prevent you from smoking even in the street in a city or town centre situation. That's the way that they feel they're going to reduce the numbers of smokers. But I still get the impression, and you've said that I vape now. Yes, I have. I've vaped for nearly 5 years. But I still have an old cigarette every now and again, because there's something about a cigarette that I rather enjoy. And even if it's 2 or 3 a month, which quite literally all it ever is, it's still nice to be able to smoke that cigarette. And I should have the right to do that. And so should everybody else.
Okay. But obviously you're a vaping advocate these days. And how would you encourage more smokers to switch voluntarily rather than coercing them?
E-cigarettes are not for everybody. And I know many people who've tried them and they don't particularly like them. I personally got away with e-cigarettes very, very easily. And not long after I started vaping, someone from PMI contacted me to see if I wanted to try the IQOS. And I couldn't get away with the IQOS at all. But I know that our very good friend, Mark Littlewood, can't stand the e-cigarettes particularly, but he gets on with IQOS. So it's horses for courses here. The free market has developed numerous products that can help people, if they want to stop smoking, to move to other products. And they're all there. So I think it's just a matter of you try it. If you don't like it, try something else. If you don't like it, then maybe just continue smoking. It's completely up to you.
Okay. I mean, we know that the number of vapers in the UK has stalled, at least it's plateaued around 3 million. I mean, what do you think is the reason for that? And how can the vaping industry and the government start getting those numbers back up again?
Well, there could be a variety of reasons for that. Some people who really enjoy smoking and don't want to give up, and that's their choice. There's some people who just do not like e-cigarettes at all, as I've mentioned, and that's completely their choice. It could also be that they're moving on to things like IQOS. I don't know what the numbers are for IQOS at the moment, but perhaps more people like that. But as I say, I just go back to what I said. It's all about freedom of choice, and that's all I'm bothered about. What concerned me when I set up the Freedom to Vape campaign was that the restrictions that were put on smokers, which I totally disagreed with and were wrong, including the smoking ban, were then just being put onto vapers as well, even though all the studies said that they were 95% safer than smoking a regular cigarette. So I just decided to stick it for vapers. But I've never stopped sticking it for smokers because I'm still an occasional one myself.
Okay. Now, the Freedom Association, as we know, was very heavily involved in Brexit through your Better Off Out campaign. Now that the UK is no longer bound by the EU's Tobacco Products Directive, could this change the tobacco control landscape in the UK? And if so, would that be for better or for worse? And I say possibly for worse, because we know that UK governments have a habit of gold plating EU policy.
Well, it should be for the better, and they could do it. Do I think that they're going to do it? Then the answer is no, because the public health lobby just has control of the Department of Health, and until there are ministers there who are willing to look at this in a more open-minded way, nothing is going to change. And there's nothing that suggests to me that the ministers in the Department for Health and Social Care are going to change their minds.
What about vaping, though? Because obviously, generally speaking, public health and the UK government is more pro-vaping than most EU member states. Is it not an opportunity, perhaps, for the government to liberalise some of the current restrictions on e-cigarette marketing, for example?
Yes, they could, and I sincerely hope that they do. But I did a number of reports just 2 or 3 years ago that looked at the vaping policies of UK councils. And it was just incredible. They just didn't even understand what an e-cigarette was. They had absolutely no idea about vaping. When I reminded some councils that you're actually breaking the law by saying that someone who has given up smoking and is now vaping must stand in a smoking shelter with other smokers, they were shocked by it. But it actually was breaking the law. But they didn't realise it. But I mean, so many councils considering they have the lead on public health in their particular areas, don't actually have a clue what they're talking about, Simon. They haven't the faintest idea. They just don't understand it.
Okay. I mean, that raises an interesting point, and you mentioned a bit earlier as well that obviously once you get smoking bans, it's very easy for local authorities just to extend them to vaping as well. One of our frustrations is that we feel we don't get very much support by vapers who have given up smoking completely, or vaping bodies, because they won't support smokers. They want to distance themselves from smoking. We say, look, you cannot stick your head in the sand like this, because if they ban smoking in more public places, they will inevitably come after vaping as well in the future.
Yes, I agree with you. Completely agree with you. First they came for smokers and I did nothing. And then they came for vapers. Well, I wish I had done something. I agree with you entirely there. I mean, I realized, I was thinking about this earlier today, Simon. Back in July 2007, I was sitting in the garden in our village pub with my wife, and the smoking ban had just come into place. And of course, a lot of smokers were outside enjoying the summer sunshine, and someone was complaining. He was saying, you shouldn't be allowed to smoke out here. It should be banned out here as well. And I thought, yes, this is the way that this is going to go. And it's taken quite a long time to get there, but you could see the direction of travel. E-cigarettes weren't around then, but now, because people just don't seem to understand what an e-cigarette is, they're just going to lump everything in. So if there's a ban of smokers, which there shouldn't be, in the great outdoors outside a cafe, a bar, or a restaurant, they're going to ban e-cigarettes as well. Even though there's absolutely no scientific evidence for it. Maybe there's no scientific evidence for secondhand smoke either, really. But they're going to lump vapors in with smokers at the same time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the moment. We will come back to you later. We're going to move on to Liz Barber. Now, Liz has been coming to Forest events for many, many years. She's retired. She has smoked for over 40 years and has no desire to quit. She's tried PMI's heated tobacco device, IQOS, but only, and I quote, when trapped in non-smoking hotel rooms and other such hells. Now, Liz is what we call a confirmed smoker, and I like to think that Forest's unique selling point is that we give a voice to people like Liz, essentially adults who enjoy smoking and don't want to stop, despite incessant attempts to denormalize them and their habit. Now, Liz, good evening. Can you quickly explain to people here your history as a smoker? When did you start?
When I was about 18, I think, and I'm a lot older than that now. So I've been smoking for over 40 years, and during that time, there's not really ever been a point where I felt that I wanted to stop of my own accord, and much less that I was going to be persuaded to stop by anybody else. And that can be anybody from friends, family, to indeed, the Public Health England and all of the rest of it. I wasn't persuaded by the smoking ban. I'm not persuaded by e-cigarettes. I enjoy smoking and I don't want to stop. I've heard everything that they have to say about the dangers of smoking. After that, it is up to me whether I decide to continue to smoke or not. And I just wish that they would respect the decisions that are being made by adults and their autonomy. It seems to me as though they just don't ever hear the word no. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, can you describe your life as a smoker in Britain today? I mean, since the smoking ban came in, because the reality is, I think a lot of smokers did adapt to the smoking ban. We certainly know that a lot of smokers stopped going regularly to pubs and clubs, but the majority of people have adapted to it. I mean, how have, not just the smoking ban, but some of these other policies, how has that affected you personally?
Well, obviously the ban meant that I, had to be quite honest, what I need to do most of all when I'm going out, particularly on an evening, because I used to, before COVID, be out quite a lot. So I would just have to remember to bring a coat and see what the weather was going to be like. Unfortunately, it's a different barrel of fish being a smoker in the UK than it is when you're abroad. You have to go outside to smoke in most probably places abroad. So that's a completely different deal. you know, if you're in Spain, to being in Stockton-on-Tees. So yeah, it's not ideal. I'm frustrated that many pubs made a very poor, if any, effort at all to provide adequate smoking, you know, areas for smokers. One of the pubs near me, it put up a fabulous canopy and some heaters, but it never yet had any gas in the heaters. So that sort of thing I find really annoying. But have I let it stop me going out? No, I have not, and it's never going to either. I mean, the only time I ever use an e-cigarette is, as you said there, you know, if I'm stuck in some wretched hotel where I can't get the windows open, or if I'm on a train. I tried the IQOS quite recently, and I don't know, I think I got 3 devices that just didn't work, and I didn't like, well, I was able to get 1 cigarette off of it, and then they wouldn't, the next one wouldn't go in, despite all manner of cleaning. But I didn't like the smell of it, I didn't like the taste of it. So I just use this little compact thing, which has the benefit of looking like a marker pen. So if I'm just doing this, people think I'm thinking about, you know, what...
I have this one, it's very good. Yes, it's tasty.
Now we'll keep going, Liz. I mean, as a smoker, though, do you feel stigmatized? And if they introduce further tobacco control policies, some of the ones that we've mentioned already, I mean, do you think that will have any effect on you at all? I mean, you've smoked this long. I mean, is there anything the government could do to persuade or force you to actually give up?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the more they try, the more I will refuse to do so. I will only stop smoking if I want to stop smoking. You know, if the government want to stop me going out to a pub and saying that I can't actually smoke within, you know, within the grounds of the pub or outside of a cafe or whatever, then I'll just have to go and live somewhere else where I can. I will not stop smoking.
But we know, knowing you for many years, Liz, and I know how strongly you feel about this, but I mean, as a confirmed smoker, how far will you actually go to defend your right to smoke? Because you know, like I know, the big problem we have is that most smokers are fairly apathetic. I think many smokers are browbeaten. They're made to feel guilty about their habit. You know, we know that they're not going to march down Whitehall in their thousands. But if we're threatened with further tobacco control policies designed to push us down to a smoking rate of 5% or less by 2030, what do you think? You know, what will be the tipping point, do you think? Or will there not be a tipping point? Will smokers just continue to suck it up?
I generally think that, yes, smokers will be, will just, as you say, suck it up. They'll, you know, go to different places. They'll maybe just have friends around. I mean, you know, this pandemic has obviously kept people at home. People have gotten used not to being able to go out. Maybe that's what would happen. I think there's enormous apathy within the British public about all manner of things. I don't feel stigmatized because I'm not a person that you can quite easily stigmatize. I'm a quite difficult person to shame or, you know, pressurize in that way. And I don't know, maybe because people know that nobody has a go at me. I've not really come across any aggravation, you know, from people where I live, at least. I've not been subjected to any of it. And if I was, they would be given very short shrift. I mean, I don't know what we can do. And as you say, you can't even get anybody to engage in the conversation about it. You know, you cannot. So it's not to me that they want to even listen. And neither do I believe that organisations don't understand about vaping. They don't want to understand. They're not interested. You know, it's been quite a step change that the government paper, as I was reading it, actually acknowledges the role of e-cigarettes. Finally, because to me it's the invention and the development of e-cigarettes that has driven the reduced numbers of smokers. But you know, that doesn't get away from the fact that they are nevertheless quite happy to make no distinction whatsoever between cigarette smoking and vaping. I might be more inclined to, you know, to get interested in trying out different e-cigarettes. If it would mean that I could, you know, use my e-cigarette inside of a pub. But for the vast majority of premises that I've been into, you can't do that. So why the heck would I bother? What benefit am I deriving? If I still have to go outside, well, I may as well stick with the product I prefer. And the product I prefer is a cigarette.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz. We'll end on that and come back to you later. Now, our third speaker tonight is Mark Oates. Mark has taken part in 1-2 Forest events in the past. He's the director, he's first of all a former parliamentary researcher. He's the director of We Vape and the Snus and Nicotine Pouch Users Association. He's a fellow of the Adam Smith Institute and an advocate of evidence-based harm reduction in a range of areas from tobacco to drug policy. Mark has worked on the successful 2018 campaign to legalize medical cannabis in the UK. So obviously a successful campaigner. Welcome, Mark. Over to you.
Hi, Simon. I think if we manage to get to smoke-free by 2030 just by chance, I don't think it would be a bad thing as such. But I think what really matters is how you go about trying to achieve that. And if you try and do it through a liberal means, coercion, bans, tax increases that we know only hurts the poorest in our society, not only I think it is an awful society to live in, but I don't think it's actually even going to achieve the aim that it sets out to do. What we actually need is more freedom. And that comes in many forms. But for example, the fact that snus, which is a fantastic product that people enjoy using, that is one of the oldest harm-reducing products around, is illegal in this country. And I've been campaigning to legalize it. We all know that unbanning something is harder than banning things, but that in itself would offer an opportunity to people that perhaps e-cigarettes don't work for. And another area that's really important is informing the public. Currently, the government is not allowing the passage of information to the public and to smokers. So right now, about 60% of smokers think that vaping is as dangerous for you as smoking, and that's awful. And that's down to, you know, the media scare stories that like to jump out at any badly thought piece of research out there. So the government needs to allow companies to actually inform the public of the products that are out there. For example, heat not burn. I mean, I don't think many people know that it even exists. Nicotine pouches, again, they're not really known about. So the government needs to step aside, if you ask me, if it's going to achieve it. People don't understand the relative risk. And another area is nicotine limits. Vaping doesn't work for a lot of smokers because the government have put a ban on anything above 20 milligrams of nicotine. And that's just a retrograde step if you actually want to get people across to vaping. There's nothing wrong with nicotine. I think the whole story around smoking and nicotine is completely, the public are confused. And sadly, I see an awful lot of snobbery on some of the pages I have on Facebook for vapers, people having a go, that people that aren't smokers, people that aren't vapers, having a go at them in tandem, just saying, why don't you just not smoke or not use vaping products? But actually, enjoying the pleasure of nicotine, which I do, which I'm currently using some snus tonight, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's a very human desire to go and want to enjoy oneself, just as people actually go for long distance runs. It's actually a similar thing. Your body releases endorphins and they're just as much pleasure chasers as us. And there's lots of things in our society that are dangerous. Riding a motorbike is incredibly dangerous. But I don't want to live in a society where we just try and coerce and tell people that want to ride motorbikes or want to smoke how they should live their lives.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought it'd be an interesting thing to talk about, because do you think that some vaping advocates are getting a bit too much like public health activists to the extent that they often mimic the language of anti-smoking campaigners? I mean, I know that my concern, I know that others share it, is that many of the leading vaping advocates in Britain have a long history of anti-smoking activism. And the danger, it seems to us, is that vaping is increasingly being sold by public health, not as a pleasurable habit in its own right, but purely as a quit smoking tool. And it seems to me that will actually put off a lot of confirmed smokers, like Liz, for example, because she wants pleasure in her life. She doesn't want to be told you should switch to this product because it's a quit smoking tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think vapors have got to be very careful, because some of the people in tobacco control, they're not necessarily driven by wanting to see lower smokers, as it were. They're kind of driven by this desire to tell people how to live their lives. And once, it's been mentioned tonight already, but once they achieve and they manage to get a small percentage of people smoking, they won't stop there. They'll move on to the next thing, because for them, no kind of risk or enjoyment is allowed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because I think there are a lot of people who see vaping as a means to an end, which is to try and drive smoking rates down. But as you say, as soon as smokers have quit in even large numbers, they will switch to trying to get people off nicotine. And we already hear from a lot of people in public health, they see vaping purely as a short-term measure, and that ultimately they want to get people off nicotine itself. So how, if we're talking in terms of tobacco control and control essentially of the consumption of nicotine, how do we change that debate? Because I mean, this isn't original. Lots of people have said this, that nicotine is no more harmful than caffeine. Is there not more we can do to associate nicotine and caffeine in people's minds, so that they see that there is no additional risk to nicotine?
Yeah, well, there's some people working on that. I don't know if you've seen the film You Don't Know Nicotine, but it's fantastic. And I've been trying to encourage lots of people I know to watch it who may not have an interest in the space. Nicotine actually is a much more complex thing, and there's definitely elements that need to be understood. There's talk that it may be helpful in the field of Alzheimer's. I'm not a researcher in that field, but that's certainly interesting. And we shouldn't fear that nicotine may actually have some positives to it. I know from some research I was doing into sport that nicotine is on the anti-doping body's list of watch drugs, because you can actually improve your cardiovascular performance by about 10% by using it. We need to get it. There's a lot of snobbery out there, and I think informing people about the truth is fundamental. And just quickly, one problem that has been laid is that around sort of youth vaping, as it were. There's a big scare in America about youth vaping. And now in the UK, we don't have a problem with youth vaping. But what's interesting is we do have a problem with youth smoking. Whereas in America, they've actually massively reduced the youth vaping rate. And if we got to a future whereby there were people in their 20s that started vaping and never started smoking, a lot of the tobacco control lobby would not be happy. But in fact, that's not a bad thing necessarily. I'm the type of person that, as a teenager, I was chasing doing things which were not allowed, that I could get in trouble for. And I would be picking up a cigarette. And if I wasn't picking up a cigarette, I might choose a vape. But it'd be better to be choosing a vape than a cigarette, perhaps. Okay.
Now, we'll just finish this bit by, do you want to plug the government consultations? I know you've been active on social media trying to get people to respond. There's a government consultation. The closing date is next Friday, the 19th of March. Do you want to just say something about that and try to encourage people to complete it?
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what your position as a smoker or a vapor, I think it's really important to get involved in this consultation. The vaping world itself seems to be convinced, perhaps because a lot of vaping bloggers online, vape reviewers, that the government we've now left the EU and the government's just going to completely get rid of the TPD. I don't see that happening. The only way it would happen if we actually put pressure on them to do so. But I get the feeling that they're quite keen to go along with the current rules, which would be a massive mistake, because there's a huge amount of policy in there which is detrimental to the supposed government aim of smoke-free 2030. And what worries me about smoke-free 2030 a little bit is what happens when we get to 2030 if they haven't achieved their aim. Are they going to get draconian?
Yeah, I agree. All right, thank you very much, Mark. Now, moving on to Rae Maile. Where's Rae? Ah, there he is. Right. Now, Rae joined Panmure Gordon in 2019 from Senkos Securities, where he was an equity research analyst covering UK general financials and global tobacco companies. Previously, he was a partner at Casanova, and do you pronounce it Casanova or just Casanova? Okay. And he was also an MD at JP Morgan Cazenove, where he held specialist sales and research roles covering financial services and tobacco companies. Now, Rae's role tonight is to explain what impact future tobacco control policies, such as a tobacco levy, might have on the tobacco industry and how the industry is changing and transforming, and what that means for consumers, especially confirmed smokers who enjoy smoking and don't want to quit. So Rae, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. I mean, there's quite a lot in all of that to cover. So we can do some easy bits. I mean, obviously this idea of a levy on tobacco company profits has been around from Ash year in, year out for a long time. And obviously with the parlous state of government finances, it's a very easy thing to bring forward, which without doubt costs you absolutely no votes, unlike putting up personal taxes. So there's always a risk of it. The impact almost certainly will end up getting passed back to consumers, same as every tax on smoking always has done. Because the elasticity of demand is so low, then it will work again and it'll be the consumer that will pay. I guess the attraction for the government is it can apply these kind of levies in the way that it did on the banks. And apparently there is no immediate impact on consumers, but trust me, if the banks are paying more taxes, then somewhere along the line, you using bank services will end up paying for it. It'll be the same with any kind of tobacco levy. What else is the industry up to, though? I mean, that was the more interesting part, because obviously much of the debate about vaping, heat not burn in particular, because of Philip Morris, has been driven by the companies themselves, who, in the cases of Philip Morris initially, but BAT also more of late, have pushed quite hard on this idea that it's time to go for a smoke-free world. And Philip Morris obviously has set up the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World and funded it, independent of anything itself it does, but obviously it did provide the initial funding. BAT talks about having 50 million consumers of smoke-free products within a short period of time from a current level of 13 million. And without doubt, IQOS has transformed the Japanese tobacco market. 25% of the market now uses heat-not-burn products. The rate of decline in combustible cigarettes has been 8 to 10% per annum for the last 6 or 7 years as heat-not-burn has rolled out. Now, is that a template for the rest of the world? I'd say definitely not. I mean, the fact is IQOS has become a much bigger and more successful business than anyone would have expected it to have been when Philip Morris first talked about it. But it's also been incredibly expensive to establish that. These businesses have only been established through huge levels of subsidy, an enormous amount of marketing, and as some of the other speakers have already said today, actually in the face of quite a lot of hostility from public health, who, broadly speaking, have seen the end of their own jobs if people choose not to smoke in ways which they're not meant to choose, if you see what I mean. Obviously, the message since the 70s has always been quit or die, not quit by doing something else you might enjoy. Now, the companies themselves, I mean, when we talk about potential regulation, up to this point, you could always rely on the tobacco industry, I think, to be absolutely foursquare behind smokers, absolutely defending the right to smoke, absolutely all the time in every single market. Sadly, it doesn't really feel that way anymore. Philip Morris has obviously made a lot of play about going for a smoke-free world. The company very openly talks about how it moves on to the last cohort of people who, like Liz, really don't want to give up, and how do we go about making them choose IQOS instead? And Simon, you would know that when we did that forest event at the Conservative Party conference a couple of years ago, I said that as far as treatment of customers went, it was reminiscent of Gerald Ratner. Frankly, you're throwing loyal customers under the bus in pursuit of something which might be very noble, but isn't actually what you're there for. Whether that kind of behaviour actually filters through to consumers at ground level, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to turn it over to your audience as much as anything else, whether they associate Philip Morris down to the brand that they buy, in particular something like BAT, where you don't actually see that line of sight from a tobacco company name down to the brand you buy. and therefore that defends them a little bit from consumer feedback. I don't know. But certainly there is, I think, a concern that the tobacco industry suddenly are not as supportive of smokers as once they were, despite the fact that all these aspirations for growth in new products is funded by smokers, without doubt, has been for the last decade, will be for the next decade. And I think that does leave something of a difficult position for the tobacco companies to come to terms with.
Okay, I mean, that covers in a way part of what I was going to ask you, but I will ask it anyway, because I wanted to ask you, what is your view of Philip Morris supporting this goal of England being smoke-free by 2030? Now, to be clear, I and Forrest, we fully support the efforts of Philip Morris and other tobacco companies to develop and promote reduced risk products, because that's a perfectly responsible approach to take. The problem we have is actively pursuing an anti-smoking agenda instead of a policy that puts choice front and center. Philip Morris, it seems to us, is turning in its backs on millions of consumers who enjoy smoking and even today don't want to quit. So in other words, given that cigarettes are still a very important part of the business, is there not a degree of hypocrisy about their position?
It's a very naked commercial decision. And I guess the interesting thing for the message in the UK is that Philip Morris is a very distant fourth place player in cigarettes. And therefore, commercially, it's risk-free. So Marlboro Lights will be a huge brand in London and the southeast, doesn't sell north of Watford. A generality, but that's the point. And therefore, where you look at the markets where Philip Morris has pushed IQOS most aggressively, initially they've all been markets where Philip Morris's cigarette share was much lower than its global share. Japan, for example, was dominated by Japan Tobacco, a very big, sleepy 60% market share owner. Well, if Philip Morris has got 25%, 3 times out of 4, it's probably nicking someone else's customer. In the UK, with its market share less than 1 in 10 of smokers, again, it's a very easy way of currying favour on a global stage without financially risking much from your existing business. And therefore, there is a hypocrisy, but there's also quite a hard commercial logic about it too.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, moving on to our last panelist this evening, I'm delighted to welcome Simon Hills. Now, Simon is actually enjoying his first week of retirement. He retired last Friday after a long stint as associate editor of the Times magazine, which, as many of you know, will comes with the Saturday edition of the Times. What I didn't know until a couple of days ago is that Simon once ran a sailing centre in Greece, and he began his career in journalism interviewing pop stars, which I have to say surprised me a little bit. But what I did know was that in 2007, he wrote a book called Strictly No, How We're Being Overrun by the Nanny State. Because as a direct result of that book, he subsequently wrote a series of articles for Forrest's Free Society website. Simon still smokes, but only just. He describes himself as, quote, a very lightweight 1 a day now, maybe 2 on a big night. Well, let's assume that tonight is a big night and Simon can puff away on his 2 cigarettes. Anyway, over to you, Simon.
Yeah, I think probably my take's slightly different. I don't have any sort of professional vested interest or any campaigning interest in smoking, but I'm constantly enraged by the way smokers are treated. And I think this aspiration to just ban, aspirations, I think in common with the other panelists, to ban anything, I think is sort of morally wrong, but especially with smoking. And I sort of, what comes to my mind actually is a conversation I had probably 15 years ago in a pub, and a friend of mine was going for a terrible time. His girlfriend had left him and everything. Said, well, how can anybody split up with anybody without being a smoker? And I think that no one really has taken on board that this act is just simply spiteful. That actually smokers, they can't smoke in pubs, they can't really smoke in public, can't smoke in airports, can't smoke in... They're not really doing anybody any harm other than themselves. And I think it's a very bad thing when you're actually hitting and targeting people who are probably rather more distressed, possibly, than other people. Certainly might be more nervy than other people. Maybe just, even if they enjoy it, it just seems to me a particularly sort of spiteful act. And I think that the sort of science around smoking is rather sort of, well, one-sided and weighted terribly against this group of people. And if you look at life expectancy, for example, in Ireland, it's exactly the same as Greece, and Ireland has 100% fewer smokers and half the number of people smoke in Ireland as they do in Greece. For some reason, Greeks have a very long life expectancy. Japan, we talked about, hugely heavily smoking population, certainly up until recently, and it's about second longest life expectancy in the world. So people are dying of other things. And I think if you look at, say, Whitney Houston, Prince, Michael Jackson, Heath Ledger, they all died. What did they die of? Prescription drugs, i.e. doctors gave them their means of dying. Now, sometimes I just think, and I'm not saying that smoking is good for you by any stretch of the imagination. I smoke, and I know what a heavy night does to my chest. I think it's foolish to say it has sort of health benefits. But I would say is if Michael Jackson maybe just sat back with a fag and didn't knock back, hundreds of prescription drugs given to him, he might have had better life chances than he did. And so I think that you can't really, or you shouldn't be that prescriptive on anybody's life choices, because life choices are actually a complex combination of a number of factors. So I could smoke and not drink. I could smoke 5 pints of beer a day and 1 cigarette a day, as I do now. And that's probably very bad for me. But what worries me as well is just what sort of society this smoke-free society. Smoke-free just means smokers, doesn't it? It doesn't mean having a fire pit in your garden, for example. It doesn't mean not having a wood-burning stove, but I think it probably might. And I think if you look at the Times' clean air campaign, in fact, you're now drilling down to tiniest quantities of particles, in the atmosphere. And as Simon said, I wrote this book in 2007. And just everything I wrote in that book has happened. Society has become much more prescriptive in terms of what we eat, where we can drive, and so on and so on and so on. And I think smokers are kind of bellwether for what's happening in wider society, because they're an easy, visible target, and for a powerful, well-remunerated health lobby, which I think has its tail up at the moment. Regardless of that, it's actually completely failed, and the people aren't living particularly longer, and everyone's sort of waddling around, they say, filling themselves up with sort of Lucozade and donuts. In fact, it's their right to do so. It's got nothing to do with it. But to nationalise our bodies in this way, I think, is a terrible thing, and I'm quite pessimistic, actually, because I think this will go. I think this will probably happen to us.
Okay. Now, it's interesting that you mention about people who are distressed, nervy. That's maybe why they smoke for comfort, because certainly at the moment, the anti-smoking lobby are trying to make out that smoking causes mental health issues, rather than actually accepting that maybe there are other underlying issues and people turn to a cigarette for comfort. I mean, we are constantly arguing against bans on smoking on hospital grounds. And people say, why are you doing that? Hospitals shouldn't be encouraging people to smoke. We're saying, well, look, it's not about that. Of course, hospitals don't want to be seen to encourage people to smoke. But the reality is hospitals can be very stressful places, not just for patients, but also for visitors who've just had bad news, even for members of hospital staff. And to say to those people, you cannot smoke anywhere on the grounds in the open air. And that's why you're now seeing some people attached to a catheter or a drip. They're standing several hundred yards away from the hospital on a busy main road because somebody in authority has decided, as you say, pure spite, I believe, to say that they can't smoke in the hospital grounds. And it is really quite outrageous. But I mean, you've come from the media, and the reality is it's getting harder all the time to get our message across in the media, because I mean, there are a handful of, I don't like using the word pro-smoking, but there are a handful of columnists who smoke and will occasionally write about it. Rod Liddell, for example, Tom Utley in the Mail. But even when Tom writes about it, he has to put in a little, he has to add, oh, smoking's terribly bad for you, and I wish I should never have started smoking. And people just feel, you know, almost embarrassed to mention it these days. And I wonder, you know, if you can almost advise us on how do we turn the media around, not to be on our side, because we're not talking about promoting smoking, but simply to have a debate about some of these very serious issues, which is not just about smoking, it's about personal autonomy.
And I think it's very difficult, because I don't think the media is on our side, really. And the media is basically on the side of making money. I mean, I think, like cigarette companies, you know, you're sniffing out your readers, and the trouble is that the smokers are just a minority. That's all there is to it. We're 15% of the population, and the media is going to go for 85% of the population, whatever its readership group is. And I think you can do it so humorous, and they will sort of sniff the air. So I mean, I think the Times on its clean air campaign is a good example. There's any press release which, you know, it's just sort of hints that ickle children are going to be dying because they live in Aldgate as opposed to Altrincham or whatever. They're going to leap on it. So I mean, I think press release journalism is horribly prevalent, and I think that smoking is just however many press releases Boris puts out is not going to work. And I think actually the media, I think kind of the culturally is where you need to go, in a sense. And what I find interesting, for example, is everyone's so sort of pro-cannabis, and you know, and I'm kind of pro-cannabis as well, you know, but I don't think it's a healthy, you know, look at the people who died young, look at the reggae musicians, they all kind of died at sort of 50, whereas cigar smokers, you know, Hitchcock, Churchill, Lou Gray, you know, George Burns, they all lived to 100. Yeah, you know, if you want a long life, smoke a cigar, don't smoke a spliff. You know, I mean, that's just. But I think that's the kind of both those. I think that's a kind of cultural thing, you know. So I mean, cannabis doesn't really mean much to sort of younger people, but it's kind of cool. And the people who want to ban smoking did it at university. Do you see what I mean? And that's the sort of ambience, and that's the sort of cultural air that we're breathing. And someone like me, it's, I mean, people quite like it, because the idea is, oh God, you're still smoking, aren't you? You sort of mean it's sort of, you know, me, Robert Crampton, you know, sort of go out and sort of puff away at sort of done, you know. But it's
his age now.
But yeah, exactly. You know, sort of, you know, the sort of, you know, sort of senior members. It's not. There's nothing in it for the media to support smokers. I think that's the real problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I'm going to hand back to Rob now. So we'll bring in, you know, other members of the audience. Rob.
Great, thanks very much. Now, we don't have a massive amount of time, so I'd encourage you, beg you, to keep your contributions short and to, or just ask a question or whatever. So I prefer not to have speeches. I see some people are well into the game already, have got their hands up. If you don't know Zoom already, somewhere around the edge of your screen, somewhere there'll be a button that says participants. If you click on that, you'll see a list of everybody in the meeting. And then within that box, there's a button called raise hand, and I can then see you, and I'll take you to contribute. I think on Macs, it can appear under reactions instead, but it's mostly under participants as far as I know. Right, okay, so first up, it's Mark Denman.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask Andrew if he might be so kind to expand a little bit on his remark to the point that there isn't actually a lot of scientific evidence concerning the dangers of secondhand smoke. My very superficial understanding is that this was based on just a few studies back whenever on the blood levels of nicotine in children who were children of parents who smoked, and that in fact it did not take any consideration of their diets, because of course tomatoes and potatoes and aubergines and various other things contain nicotine, which can affect the nicotine levels in our blood. And so that's my very superficial understanding of these supposed scientific studies. And I was wondering if Andrew could expand upon that by any chance. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Marcus.
Yes, thanks. That was very interesting. I remember that the question just asked there. I remember in it'd be the 90s, the World Health Organization said that there was no proof of secondhand smoking, very different to now. And they were jumped all over by the anti-smoking zealots. And indeed, they recanted and said that all the studies conflicted. So that's where we ended up with that. But my point was about there are actual health benefits from smoking, at least from nicotine, which obviously can be delivered by other methods as well. But in 1988, and I think, Simon, it was in the Times, basically there was a study by Cambridge University which stated the benefits for the brain. And those included increased powers of memory retention and being 2/3 less likely to get Alzheimer's. So that's something to throw into the mix as well. Sadly, I know you don't want anybody to speak, so there were so many points that cropped up during this that I wanted to talk about. So one thing I will say is I think, yes, it is going to be a downward spiral from here. The health Nazis, as some people call them, basically have seen that they can be successful with us to a degree, and they have since already gone after people who drink, people who eat nice food, and all that sort of thing. And I think we are becoming a nanny state because of that success, and because the people behind it really want social control. That's what it's all about. Great. And I won't go into any other points now.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I've got Stephen next.
I don't think we acknowledge here how vastly exaggerated the claims about firsthand smoking being harmful are. An example, Winston Churchill is supposed to have smoked 300,000 cigars in 90 years. I think for many people, if they hadn't have smoked, their lives would have been shorter and less healthful. And I don't think there's any good scientific evidence, because there's never been a randomized study, that what I said is incorrect. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Now, but by the way, people are commenting in the chat, but for some reason I think they're only going to me, so nobody else can see them. So if you've made a comment in the chat and you'd like to be everybody else to hear it, then please do just stick your hand up, and we'll have it in. We'll take maybe 2 or 3 more, depending on who puts their hands up or not. Now, right, Jeff Cliff.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to make the point that if the government really wants to recover the economy post-COVID, at the same time as getting rid of smokers, I, as a vapor and former smoker, feel that I've got absolutely no chance at all. If they want us to go to pubs and restaurants and use buses, trains, coaches, planes, as a vapor, I can't do any of those any more than I could when I was a smoker, because I'm made to feel uncomfortable. I think that the two aims are mutually exclusive.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Jeff. So I'm just going to take Jeannie, and then I'll come back to the panel and give them a chance to say a minute or 2 each, sort of respond to anything you'd like. Jeannie.
Yes. Oh, hello. I'm sitting here with my cigar and my glass of red wine, but I've got poor Wi-Fi, so I can't show you me doing that. But I just wanted to say I really enjoyed all these presentations. Wish I could have been there too. But I liked what Mark Oates said about the other uses of nicotine, and I think that's probably, an area where we ought to, develop and talk about a lot more than we are now. I remember seeing a presentation which was by the University of Waterloo in Canada some years ago now, but it put up, this is a 50-year-old brain, and this is how it looks with a bit of dementia and a few sort of things. And then they showed it later on after 6 weeks, and then after 10 weeks, I think. And it says this is with injections of nicotine, and the brain had actually gone the other way in terms of the damage. And I just think there's so much there that no one's really focusing on, and that nicotine is not the devil that it's made out to be. Anyway, I just wanted to say I think we should make more of that area, and to thank you, Simon, because I think it's been a great webinar.
Thanks, Ginny.
Peter, sorry, I'm going to take Peter because apparently he's waving at me and I can't see him. Which Peter is it that wants to speak? Let's have. I'm going to go back to the gallery view for a second. Who's waving at me? Anybody waving at me? I can't see anything.
Rob, how about getting John Mallon in? Because John's going to talk about what's going on in Ireland, where they've got a smoke-free policy that's supposed to come into force by 2025, which is unbelievable. There's absolutely no chance in hell that Ireland's going to be smoke-free by 2025.
John,
you need to unmute yourself, John.
Yeah, it's not going to be, but a bit like the UK, my observation would be that these countries will be smoke-free when the smokers decide, not when the government or the anti-tobacco tobacco brigade decide. Smokers will continue to smoke all they wish, or will quit if they wish, and that's what we want to see, the freedom to do either. In the event over here, it's probably the same in the UK. They say that smoke-free is 5% of the population, but they also tell us how many people are currently smoking. So if it suits them to say it's 5%, or it suits them to say it's 10%, they'll say it when the time comes. And it doesn't matter if more than 5% are smoking or not. It won't make any difference. They'll just say it's been a success. It's what they did the last time around when they were celebrating 10 years of the smoking ban. It was a success because they said so. Even though all of the indicators were that it wasn't a success, they said it was, so it was. And it'll be the same with the smoke-free. They'll say it's down to 5%, therefore they've achieved their objective. That's literally it. It's being seen to do, not being seen to do something. It's a facade, and it's a facade in politics. It's a facade, and the anti-smoking movement is political. It's just a facade that they put up. So smoking will end or won't end if smokers decide. Nothing at all what to do with the government.
Right, I'm going to try and get Peter in if he can unmute himself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes, yes.
Great. I wanted to make a point about something that was said much earlier about people confusing vaping with smoking tobacco. I just can't understand the mentality of people who believe that vaping water vapor flavored is anywhere akin to smoking tobacco. It's a bit like saying, well, alcohol-free drinks are still drinking. It seems ludicrous to me. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Right. So I'm going to whiz back through the panel now, just in the order that they spoke. So just a minute or two on anything that you want to respond to. So Andrew, if I can get you to unmute yourself and kick things off.
Yes, back to the first question, which was about passive smoking. I had to look through my phone. I'm pleased there was lots of questions there because it gave me a chance to look back at a study that I remember from 2013, and it was of 76,000 women, and it just proved that there was no direct link at all between passive smoking and lung cancer. Now, yes, of course. I mean, if you suffer from asthma or something like that, then if you're in a room that has a lot of smoke in it, well, I can imagine that it sets it off. But certainly, this whole idea of passive smoking, I think, is the biggest con that's going, and it's what drove the smoking ban. Really, it was. Yeah, I know there's plenty of people who don't like secondhand smoke, and to be honest, I mean, when it comes to stale secondhand smoke, it's pretty repulsive, to be perfectly honest. So I can understand why people don't like it, but the whole health thing has just been completely overblown. But I think it's just been fabricated in many ways. Going back to that, just the last question there, which I thought was very good. Yeah, the idea that water vapor is somehow exactly the same as tobacco. Is even if you believe in passive smoking, it's just utterly ridiculous. I've had people contact me, even members of the Freedom Association, thankfully not very many, I'm talking about maybe half a dozen at most, who said, well, the easiest thing to do is just to ban e-cigarettes in the same way that you ban smoking. I said, well, why? And they said, well, it's just easy, isn't it? I said, we can say that about absolutely anything and everything. Why not ban fatty food? Why not ban sugar? Why not ban salt? Why not just take away all our choices in life? So therefore, there are plenty of people around who don't understand it. They don't want to understand it, Rob. I think that's the thing, and they're just quite happy to ban everything. And just finally, just the last point I think I do want to make is that we've seen the war on smokers over the last couple of decades, particularly from sort of the smoking ban from the 1st of July 2007. We see the way that in Wales, for example, they're trying to ban smoking outside in restaurants and bars and cafes, even considering banning it as you walk down the street through the town centre. They will eventually, because they'll say, as someone else has just pointed out, that we're down to 5% now, and therefore we're in a smoke-free world. If you think that the war on some of the other things that we enjoy is bad now, all these people will immediately turn their attention away from tobacco because they've got what they want, and there'll be a bigger war on booze, bigger war on what we eat. There'll be portion sizes, restaurants having to publish, that's been proposed, hasn't it? Restaurants having to publish the calorie count in there, and that you can't have that more than 1,000 calories in a meal. And that war will continue. So I say to anyone, you may not be a smoker. I rarely smoke these days, and I vape now. But I will say to anyone, you still need to defend smokers' rights. You still need to defend freedom, because they're going to go after something that you actually enjoy. So stand with the smokers now, stand with the vapers now, and try to prevent them from going for what actually interests you and your little pleasures in life.
Brilliant, thank you, nice point. Just as I'm bringing Liz in, that point you made about asthma and passive smoking and stuff, that was, I can't remember if I said this before in these meetings, but Simon was making this point around smoking ban ages ago, that what we needed was better ventilation in pubs. And actually that would solve much of the problem of whether it's lung cancer, heart disease, but also that irritation that non-smokers feel in pubs. Ironically, of course, now that we've got COVID, the big watchword is ventilation. And we could be opening pubs and making them safer for everybody if we had better ventilation in pubs. And if only they had followed Simon's suggestion way back then we'd be killing two birds with one stone. Anyway, Liz, your final thoughts, please.
Right, I'll see your studies, and I will bring in Ensterman Kabat, who did a study that was over a period of 40 years. It started in 1960, and it followed 118,000 smokers, and they were trying to find out any correlation between smoking and damage by second-hand smoke. There's more to it than that, obviously, but the upshot was no, they didn't, much to the chagrin of the American Cancer Society, who had until that point been paying for the research. They then swiftly whipped away the funding. The final 2 years were funded, I believe, by a tobacco company, whereupon, of course, the cancer societies were able to denounce the study because it had been funded by the tobacco industry, notwithstanding that, in fact, the anti-smoking had been funding it for 38 years. But do have a look, Enstrom and Cabot. With regard to smoking and health, I think all of us have realised, if we didn't know it already, that the only thing that matters these days is apparently health and life, the quality of either. Well, the lives in question don't really matter. Everything can be sacrificed on the grounds of saving lives, whether those lives wish to be saved or not. I think there's a puritanism about it, there's a morality about it. We know secondhand smoking was invented because they couldn't persuade people to stop on their own account, so they enlisted the assistance of people exposed or in the vicinity of smokers and said, well, they're going to kill you. Where have we heard that before? Well, you know, every day for the last bloody year, pardon my French. But to me, the question about, is this going to be a good thing? Can we achieve it? I don't know. Will it make us a better Britain? Well, I don't know, because going off what Mark was saying, I think that the way that they are likely to achieve it is by the same threats, coercion, authoritarianism, by enlisting the approbation from the general public, from ostracising and cancelling smokers. This seems to me to be a point in history. I suppose there's been them before, but I think it's a point in time where actually intolerance is not necessarily seen as a bad thing anymore. And I think that the anti-smoking brigade will seize the opportunity to use whatever means they can to turn the screw. And if that means trying to encourage employers not to employ smokers, landlords not to offer them accommodation, pubs not to make any provision for them, or indeed to not even allow them to smoke within the perimeters of the pub, I think that's what they'll do. And I think, you know, if nothing else about the last year has taught me anything, it's that people are quite happy to be intolerant and to other people.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Liz. Mark, your final thoughts?
Thanks very much. What I'd like to just finish on is, when the public health lobby going to start studying what the restriction of freedom does to our health and our mental health? We've seen during lockdown, there was an increase in clicks onto the Mind charity website from normal of 4,000 a day up to 16,000 a day. So in extremis, clearly lockdown has an effect on people's mental health because of the restriction on freedom. So if it happens very steadily and very slowly, removing our freedoms, I think it's only going to cause more mental health problems. And finally, I'll be quick because I've got to go. I'm off to have a meeting because I'm a British Army reservist. And the reason why I say that is because there's talk of increasing the smoking age to 21. And the idea that a man or woman serving in the armed forces can go out to a foreign field to risk life or limb, but they can't have a cigarette, makes my blood boil. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mark. A good point to end on as well. Sorry, Rae.
Following up on some of those points raised by the other speakers, I mean, for the last year, we've all been sitting at home being told that we have to follow the science. But the one area where the science has always been poorest has been in smoking, and in particular in secondhand smoking and these kind of issues. And I echo all of the comments that are made from others about whether the risks are really all the ones that they've ever been dressed up to be. And Rob, I sent you a message. There's very kindly a gentleman in Ireland, goes under the name of Grandad, has hosted for me a paper I wrote some years ago under, this is not my choice of website, but www.smokingouthethetruth.com. His title, my work, but I cover a lot of the areas of science in that. One of the greatest ironies, I guess, at the moment is that one of the leading proponents of vaping in the UK these days is Clive Bates, who, as head of ASH, used dodgy science to introduce the smoking bans, and now rails against dodgy science being used against vaping in the way that he used it in his past. So some of these things do go full circle, and perhaps maybe in the fullness of time, then more and more, as we are told we have to follow the science, some of that science will come through in regulation. We can but hope.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Rae. last but not least, Simon Hills.
So I'm pretty much concurring with what was said. I thought everything that Rae was saying about the way tobacco industry has been working has been very interesting and informative. I think the real problem, and I think the really distressing thing, is how hysteria is being dressed up as common sense. And if you're a journalist, you sort of click on hysterical press releases, and nobody is saying, hang on, can this really be true? And that we experienced this a long time ago, I think, as smokers with secondhand smoking. And I think it's actually filtering into all areas of life. And I think, Mark has pointed out as well. And I think we're all sort of agreeing that we're on a real uphill battle now, I think, because it's a weirdly hysterical but yet intolerant society we're moving into.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Just because he's Mr. Forest Island and Ireland's been mentioned, I'm going to bring John back in for a final quick comment.
Rob, it's just a general one. I think it's probably as applicable in the UK as it is here. But in the event, public health have taken over media and the airwaves in a way that has never happened before. Public health is the only story in town because of COVID-19, but it will pass. But during the period of the last year of it, public health have swelled their ranks, all paid huge sums of money. And these people can't be let go after the pandemic scare is over. So we are going to be left with a very wealthy, very hugely staffed public health who will go after absolutely everything when the pandemic passes. They'll want to stay in the center of the news. They'll go after obesity, they'll go after alcohol, they'll go after smoking, but they'll go after stuff they've never even gone after before, I can guarantee you. And smoking, for that reason, that's why I say smokers will decide when smoking stops, not public health.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Just as I was writing last week about the World Obesity Federation doing a report saying, trying to link COVID with the countries that have 50% or more overweight. Of course, they're all the developed countries with lots of travel links and lots of older people because they've survived longer. And but they were trying to tie COVID to obesity or even just being overweight. So they can see that there's definitely a desire there to spread these things out and use the arguments around COVID to justify more nanny state policies. And on that, I'm going to hand back over to Simon to finish off this evening's discussion.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think there's probably been a bit too much agreement. I normally like a few more arguments between people and a few fisticuffs, which I haven't had. I agree with Simon Hills. I think it is going to be an uphill battle. I think in the run-up to the new tobacco control plan, I think there's going to be a big attempt to drive a wedge between smokers and vapers and smoking and vaping. And I think, although I can understand why some people might feel that's in the interest of vaping, I do think we've got to resist that. I think we're all in this together. And I think we're fighting the same battle. I don't think there's any doubt that if they've been coming for smokers for a long, long time, and I think they will come for vapers after that. It's only a matter of time. So I think we've got to stick together. I'll end on that note. Thank you to Rob for moderating. As always, thank you to all our speakers, very much appreciated. Thank you to you, our guests, for joining us. I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to say this or for a forest meeting, but let's say happy no smoking day, and I'm off to have my one cigarette of the year. So thank you very much, everybody, and good night.